Okay, I think we're live. So good afternoon. Welcome to everybody who's watching today. This is the special meeting of council for Tuesday, May the 12th. I'm looking at the agenda. Firstly, I'll call the meeting to order. And I'll look to have the agenda approved. I'll put that motion on the table that the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's approved. Just before we move on too much, I do want to remind everybody to keep their mics muted until they're called or recognized by the chair. I would like to introduce the participants that are joining council. We have Rachel Ludwig from TCK, and where else? Cheryl Cooper from the Chamber of Commerce, Beth Vandervoort from BIA, and Ron Rempel from BODA. I believe those are all of the special guests, if you will. Did I miss anyone? Seeing none. And I will also ask that councillors hold all questions until after all of the presenters have spoken. And with that, I'll go immediately to item J1, report from administration, COVID-19 stage 1 reopening plan. Ms. Cottle.
Thank you, Mayor Barrowman, members of council and special guests. I just wanted to first thanks the guests for coming and just also acknowledge for council and for anybody who's watching from home that this is a fairly unusual council meeting. We didn't have a report or any written documentation, and there is no decision of council. It's really just an update and a conversation. But given how quickly things are changing and how many unknowns there are, this was really the best we could do in terms of having a conversation in the public realm. And if we had written a staff report in advance following our process, I would have had to pretty much rewrite it daily at this point. That's why we don't have a staff report. And again, there is no decision of council. It's really just an update and a conversation. So last week at the council meeting, I did give a presentation on some of our work on reopening plans. And one of the things I talked about was around reopening the community and the work that we've been doing with the Canmore Business Association around that. And so the Canmore Business Association is our special guests who are with us today. The Chamber, the BIA, TCK, BODA, and also CHLA. A rep from CHLA was not able to be here today, but they were invited and have been part of the conversation. So what we wanted to do is give a bit of an update on the latest thinking around the reopening of the community and Main Street. We will all be waiting with bated breath later today. Premier Kenney is scheduled to give his regular daily update. But today was the day that they indicated that whether or not they would let us know if businesses could begin to reopen on Thursday, May 14th. So 2 weeks ago, the province announced their relaunch strategy and identified stage 1 with the potential of May 14th as the possibility for the reopening. And 2 weeks might seem like a lot of notice, but in terms of the number of things that had to be pulled together and the fact that it was just yesterday that they actually published a website with resources for business, it's been a lot of questions over the last week and plus. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I know it's I can't imagine the work of the province right now in trying to answer all the questions and think things through. But we've been doing our best to try to prepare for a reopening with the limited bit of information we have. And the biggest conversation we've been having has been around how we reopen the community in a way that is safe and fitting and sustainable. And so again, last week when I was in front of council, we discussed how it's not a mass reopening and sort of flooding the community with visitors is not going to work. That won't be safe or feel safe for residents, for business owners, for their staff, or for the community or for our visitors. But we also want to support the businesses in their ability to reopen. And if the province indicates that they can reopen, we want a vibrant economy and a strong local business community. And we know that residents alone aren't enough to sustain many of our local businesses. So we've been talking about trying to figure out a way that we can support them in their opening and support the community in remaining and feeling safe, both in our actions and in our messages. And so the biggest conversation we've been having, as we mentioned last week, is around Main Street and how we might manage, especially pedestrian traffic on Main Street, and keep safe flows. And there's been lots of conversation, in particular with the BIA around that. And I know when we get to Beth that she will speak a bit more about those conversations. And I attended 4 different meetings in the last couple of days with the BIA and several of their members around different sectors and what kind of comments or concerns and thoughts they have around the reopening of Main Street. And you'll be shocked to hear that there's not unanimous thinking around what the right thing to do is or the best way to do it. But what I can say is that there is really good thinking and very robust and engaged conversation. And so I was really pleased to be able to attend those meetings and very impressed with how Beth and her board managed those meetings and had really respectful conversations among an array of diverse opinions. So we're still in conversation with the BIA trying to figure out the right thing to do. We've been very clear that the opening of Main Street is a decision of the ECC, and it is purely around community safety. So I do want to address that there's lots of conversation in the community. Having Main Street closed to vehicles and open for pedestrians is something, I believe it's been tried in the past. We have done it before around events, and it's something that is talked about and always gets very lively conversation going. This is not a trial. This is not about a future state of Main Street or downtown. This is a emergency decision around community safety. If there were to be anything like a trial or something that was permanent, that would be a decision of council. That's not what's happening here. This is really around community safety. And if we do make any changes around Main Street, it will really be to be able to address safety during the pandemic. And as soon as we are out of a state where that's something that we need to be concerned about, the program would end. So it is not anything that's being looked at in a long-term or any kind of trial. It's really purely about the emergency. So the biggest thing we've been talking and thinking about in the last since the announcement of the potential of May 14th reopening is really around reputation management. The Northern Alberta Institute of Technology put out a reopening document around a re-entry guide for facilities that really talks about the importance of reputation management and wanting to make sure that when you open and how you open, you're really thinking about managing your reputation. And when we think about managing Main Street, it is really challenging to know and understand the consequences of doing something on Main Street and the reputation that it will have both for the community, for the businesses, and also for our visitors. So we're still in the process of trying to work with the BIA, even though it's a emergency coordination center decision. We do want to work in partnership with the BIA and make sure that any decision we make is aligned as best we can with what their thoughts and concerns are. And so we're really working hard to try to partner and have the conversations that we need to have. So closing Main Street to pedestrians is still very much on the table. The real question now is just one of timing. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy Asarte, our manager of engineering, to walk you through. Andy's done a great job of coming up with concepts for Main Street and thinking through what would and would not work, sort of from a transportation perspective and a host of other operational concerns. So I'll turn it over to Andy and let him take it from there.
Thanks, Sally. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. The details I'm going to be speaking to here, Mayor and Council, are around the functional accommodation. So looking at in an area in particular, the central portion of downtown, Main Street West 2 blocks, functional accommodation of potential things that businesses will need to do to modify their operations, how we will manage vehicular traffic, cycling, walking, parking, the functional aspects of how a closure of these 2 blocks of Main Street could work. This type of use has happened historically. It's anticipated to happen again in the future. And so it was addressed in the integrated transportation plan. And that plan envisions a transition over time to collector streets on 10th Street and down on 7th Street, connecting to an arterial on 8th Avenue that provide the primary access into and around the town center. And so this has already been envisioned. There were projects that were recommended and a number of things that we were already looking at doing to improve flow of traffic and to improve transit operations. And so this planning is really just drawing on that previous work to say, okay, where would we move vehicular traffic? How do we get people around this area? In terms of what it would look like down on those 2 blocks of Main Street, this is a bit of a zoom in into one of the areas. Essentially, it has 4 gateways, 2 on 7th and 1 at each end of the closed block. And at those gateways, you would have some of our standard event barricades in place, some information signage, and that would provide information to people about protocol when you're within those 2 blocks. It would provide, it would establish what the different zones are. Those zones include pedestrian boulevard. One of the main challenges we have with downtown is as we see volumes increase, even in a regular year, the sidewalks are quite congested. We have narrow sidewalks. We have a lot of furnishings in those sidewalks. The entrances are right adjacent to the sidewalk. And so they're quite congested already. And we can anticipate with the requirements from AHS around COVID that space really doesn't lend itself to having people lining up outside a door or other accommodation on the sidewalk, plus people trying to move in 2 different directions. So the idea is here is to move that primary movement onto the street itself, and to do that in 2 lanes, essentially using the vehicle drive lanes as the travel lanes for pedestrians and people riding bicycles. What that leaves in space on the outside is an extended frontage to the business, and essentially that could be used as space to dwell. So you would move within the road and then move to the side in order to dwell and find space that allows you to do that without being adjacent to others. And also room for businesses to be able to, for example, when restaurants begin seating customers again, they could use that space to spread out additional tables so that they can get their numbers up with wider seat spacing. We had retailers discuss potential for outdoor tents for change rooms, opportunities for outdoor vending for their clothing racks, et cetera. And so that 7-meter space essentially is programmable by the businesses with residual space like the curb extensions at the corners available for people to just simply dwell, something that's presently lacking in a lot of the areas in the downtown. In terms of vehicle accommodation, we would look at the intersection at 6th Avenue. We've discussed in the past the idea of a scramble crossing. So this is a crossing where people are able to cross in all directions. We've worked with the signal folks, and for a relatively low cost, we can accomplish that here. And that's going to allow us to do a couple things. One, it provides a whole bunch more room at a very, very busy intersection for people to navigate. Instead of having to cross in 2 directions and be in narrow lines with others, they can use the entire space of the intersection to move to where they're going. It also is going to allow us to time the signals in a way that allows more traffic to move down off Main Street onto 7th and off of 6th onto Main Street going outbound without those pedestrian conflicts that we deal with now. So it would be completely separate staging. Vehicular goes, pedestrians go, vehicular goes, pedestrians go. And this is something that can be effective and that we're even considering for post-COVID world potentially leaving in place. The next intersection we're looking at is on 10th Street, and this was something that was brought to council in a report for the March COW. And it's a requirement to go to a three-way stop there to help with transit operations, but also with additional traffic expected on 10th and on 8th Avenue. A three-way stop configuration at that intersection decreases the flow for the north-south movement, but really allows that 10th Street leg to operate at a much higher level. With that change, we would bring in some of the concrete medians that allows for two-stage pedestrian crossing. That's been really effective at slowing speeds and making it much more comfortable for pedestrians to cross. The other two intersections at Main Street and at 7th, we would monitor at Main Street without the traffic on the Main Street leg. It's expected to flow a lot better there, a lot less queuing. Pedestrian traffic there is still expected to be high and interrupt traffic flow. So potentially we could look at going to free flow at that intersection, which is part of the integrated transportation plan, with similar ped crossings as 10th Street. So not too much unlike this configuration here, which would allow traffic to flow without queuing on that leg. And there would be the potential for monitoring and three-way stop at the intersection of 7th Veterans and 8th Avenue. I did throw in one additional slide here before I move to questions, and that is with respect to accessible stalls. We're looking at opportunities to move accessible stalls. Currently, they're all, generally speaking, at the corners. And so moving those around the corner, it's not that much longer of a distance. And we can accomplish that at 6th, 7th, and 8th. So it won't be much longer of a distance for accessible parking to access to the businesses if we look to relocate those. And Sally, I'll leave it to you if you want to do questions now or at the end.
I think Mayor Barrowman indicated we were going to wait till the end. Correct, Mayor Barrowman?
I did indicate that. I'm furiously writing questions down to ask Mr. Asarte, but I guess it's better not to interrupt the flow. So everybody keep track of their questions and we'll be able to ask questions of anybody after we've heard from the other presenters. So the floor is yours, Ms. Cottle.
Okay, I believe next up we had Ms. McClett, who is going to talk about the work with the CBA to date.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor and members of council. So 8 weeks ago, and it seems so short but so long, all mixed together with the announcement of COVID. We initially started meeting with the Canmore Business Alliance on a weekly basis to make sure that we were moving in the same direction and not duplicating efforts, knowing that both the chamber, each of the groups have their own membership entities. And as a town, we have, of course, the business registry, which is the more combined list of contacts. Communicating with our member group and understanding what the needs are in the business community and how to address these. And then each of the various groups taking on different elements of that conversation. And as we move towards the reopening, we of course have added to that group in order to again discuss, given the announcement a week and a half ago by the province of reopening Friday of a large portion of our downtown businesses, what does that look like? Best accommodate that in elements of doing so. So we've had 2 meetings to date. The work has been broken up into different working groups with different members focusing on elements. So we have an internal working group addressing the town's component, the communication piece, as well as how to promote safety for the business owners. And through some of our work webinars, we're trying to help business owners how to address both strategic element of reopening and the decision-making process, as well as the practical side, which we'll be addressing tomorrow in our webinar. And a lot of the questions that our business community have is, will they reopen? And I will say that 40% of our business owners are not quite sure yet if they're ready to reopen, even though the province might give the green light for that coming down. And that has to do with safety of their staff and safety of the customers. Because a lot of our downtown business owners are mom and pop shops. They're generally smaller in location, accommodating the flow of traffic. For example, Beamers and Good Earth, you can come in one side and you come out another door in order to promote flow of traffic. You still cannot access washrooms. I don't think that that is, they plan to change that, even if they're allowed to open 50% of capacity. So the challenge is for our business owners, how do they accommodate the potential of people coming to their stores and doing so in a way that is safe for both their staff and their members. So that's a bit of a synopsis. There's a lot more work that has gone into this over the last 8 weeks. But in brief, our discussion to date, we currently have a business recovery survey out to our business community, again, to understand where our business community is at present, what challenges they face and the decisions that they're making and the support that they need moving forward.
Thank you. Ms. Cottle?
Thanks, Ms. McClett. Next up, we have Ms. Vandervoot from the BIA.
Good afternoon, Mayor Borman, Council, special guests. Thanks for inviting us to be part of this conversation this afternoon. I do want to start by thanking Eleanor and the Economic Development Group in helping to lead and support so many of the conversations over the last 8 weeks. It has been really helpful to all of us because some of us work part-time and some don't even have staff. And so for all of us that are trying to pull information together, et cetera, it has been a godsend to have her in our court, so to speak. So I want to thank Town of Canmore and Eleanor and her department for all the hard work that they've put into the last 8 weeks. So I'm just going to start from a week and a half ago when we met on the Friday morning and started talking about what next steps after the announcement by Premier Kenney. So we've been actively researching what we could do and how we could do it in a safe and what we needed to do to be a support to our businesses downtown. And but the major conversation over the last few days has been around, okay, how do we keep visitors, locals, staff, business, the businesses themselves safe? And we had 4 meetings with the different sectors of businesses to accommodate as many people as we could. As Sally said, we had some interesting conversations. Some, of course, were extremely supportive of the ideas that were being proposed about creating physical distancing. And of course, there were others that were not supportive at all. So, but there were other things that came up as a result of those conversations. Safety of staff and customer, of course, how and where do people queue to wait to get into businesses? Sorry, folks, I'm going to read a little bit of this. What will be our reputation if we don't provide a safe environment for people to be in? Washrooms was a conversation probably in every one of the meetings. How do we make extra washrooms available if they're not going to be available in the usual pseudo public washroom areas? Sanitization in the public areas. Are we going to make it available, for example, on garbage cans? Are we going to create extra seating in and around Friendship Park, in front of the Civic Center, the Senior Center, to accommodate people to be able to sit and eat if they can't be accommodated in the different restaurants? Signage was a huge thing. How do we say to people and create customer etiquette for those that are coming into our downtown? and how do we encourage them to be respectful, etc. So as I mentioned, not everyone was generally agreed to some didn't agree to any kind of closure. Some understood that there had to be something that happened. And yesterday, after a lengthy board meeting, and great discussion, we made a motion to encourage, as a minimum for this long weekend, the closing of on-street parking on Main Street for the coming weekend, and pass that along for Ms. Cottle and her team to consider at their meeting. And that's about where we're at right now.
Can I just get clarity, please, on that motion? You mentioned your board approved.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically, the motion was to close Main Street to on-street parking for this weekend.
Yes.
And
We had great discussion, Mayor, about complete closure, partial closure, no closure, and went around and round it as for some time. There was concern about creating an environment that wasn't very friendly if we did a complete closure. How did we include folks that were from Grizzly Pot of Stonewaters in that area, as far as making that area as safe as possible for people to walk, because that is also a high density, high retail area. So as a minimum to start the process, and we knew that probably coming this summer that it would have to be something different, but as a minimum, as a start, to encourage just taking away the on-street parking at this point in time.
great, thanks for that clarification. And thanks for bringing the BIA perspective to this meeting. Ms.
No
Cottle?
problem.
Yes, thanks, Beth. Next, we have Rachel Ludwig from TCK.
Good afternoon, Mayor Borman and councillors. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak as Tourism Canmore Kananaskis and give you a little bit of an update. What I want to share with you today is some preliminary data that we got from a traveler sentiment survey that was sent out to our newsletter subscribers as well to our social media followers. But before I do that, I just want to share with you a little bit. Oops, I'm not sharing a screen right now, do I?
Not yet.
Maybe I'll start with that. Screen.
There you go.
Perfect. And here we go. So we are currently working very closely with Travel Alberta and our neighboring DMOs on best practices and how to help in the safe reopening of our economy. And just as Beth said, I would also like to say thank you to Eleanor and her Economic Development Department. She did a great job in bringing all our business organizations together and so that we can work jointly on the recovery efforts. And I think this is really the time to work collaboratively. So thanks, Eleanor. Before I'm presenting on the traveler survey, we did that from May 5th to 11th. I also want to put that data in a little bit of perspective. The tourism industry, not only in the Bow Valley, but in Canada and really worldwide, was hit especially hard, and we are not anticipating a quick recovery. While we are starting to open our businesses now, there will be considerably less visitation and visitor spend this summer. International borders will probably not open until at least the end of the year, and interprovincial travel probably not resuming until the end of the summer. So this will leave us with travelers from Alberta as our customer base. And while Canmore had always had traditionally high visitation from Alberta, Albertans are spending considerably less when visiting Canmore compared to travelers from the US or farther abroad. Additionally, according to research done by Ledger, 60% of Albertans are not planning on taking a vacation at all this summer. So in order to supplement the data that we've already had, we put a survey out to our followers to kind of get a feel whether the data that we're getting from other destinations is true for Canmore, or if our visitors are a bit different. And what we found out in general is that we are getting the same responses. So I'm diving into the responses that we had so far. The first question was, it's the first holiday of the year. What is on your bucket list? And a whopping 62% of respondents said they want to go for a hike to breathe in the fresh air, followed by visiting my favorite restaurant and relaxing downtown. This shows clearly that the comfort level to go into establishment is pretty low, and businesses will need to address measures to put in place very clearly, and that takeout and curbside pickup options are probably here to stay for a while longer. This slide shows how important it will be for our destination to put measures in place to allow visitors to enjoy Canmore while physical distancing. Almost 3/4 of respondents said they are looking for a place that allows safe distance. Although I don't expect a mad rush of visitors this long weekend, it will be important to show our visitors that we care about their safety and put measures in place. And I think to sell this point as well, we also have to consider our residents. So I think the sentiment is probably the same between residents and visitors alike, that they want physical distancing happening. This question about group activities was asked to give our activity providers some guidance. And although 33% said they were not comfortable with group activities, 38% are still undecided, while 27% want to see safety measures put into place. This is again an important message to business to work on and implement safety standards to make potential clients feel safe. On this slide, it was very reassuring to see that most travelers want to stay in Alberta and will drive to a destination that is up to 3 hours away, which includes our main markets of Calgary and Edmonton. According to this question, only 30% of respondents would start traveling again when travel restrictions are lifted. And the majority again was unsure at the time of the survey. This gives us a clear indicator that travelers need to feel safe in order to consider traveling again, and this will be our #1 message going forward. The question about vacation length is very reassuring for our accommodation partners that will hopefully see an increased length of stay compared to an average summer, considering that more than half of respondents are looking at a vacation of 4 days or longer. And this is my last slide. The question was, where would they want to stay? And the majority of respondents will want to go camping, which makes sense as it is outdoors with little interactions outside of your traveling party. And then the second largest response was again undecided, followed by hotels. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
I'm trying to
Ms. Cottle, it'll be back to you.
Sure thing. You know how to do it, Rachel?
I'm trying.
Trying. Okay, thanks, Rachel.
There we go.
Very interesting and helpful data. Thank you. Next up is Cheryl from the Chamber.
Good afternoon, Mary Borman and Town Council and all of the special guests that are joining us today. Can everybody hear me okay? Probably sounds like I'm in a bit of a cave, but yes, and thank you everyone for all of the hard work that you've been putting in these past couple of months. I know it's been very challenging on many, many levels to try to navigate through all of this, and everybody is putting extra time into trying to figure all of this out and understand everything that's going on. I think that having had some conversations with our board as well as many of our members, one of the main concerns that I think is coming to the forefront in all of this is some of the mixed messaging that's being put out there in terms of what is safe, what's not safe, what should we be doing, what should we not be doing. I think that all of our board members as well as our business members are just really seeking clarity right now on what the messaging is and how we as a community are going to be addressing a lot of those needs for clarification in our community and how to proceed forward. Several of our business members have expressed concern, absolutely, for what reopening is going to mean. And I think that the message that we've been sending out to them essentially has been just to try to we're all figuring this out as we go along. There's really not, a hard, fast set of rules that have been set out for any of us through all of this. So I've just been trying to encourage people to go with the flow, stay tuned for updates. Again, we'll be getting another update from the Premier this afternoon on how to navigate through and whether or not we'll even be what the reopening is going to look like, if there is going to be a reopening at all, and how that is going to impact us. And again, just letting everybody know that they do have choice in whether or not they want to reopen, and making sure that they're keeping their staff and our community safe as priorities. So implementing, making sure that we have guidelines available for them all to be able to implement safe measures, and making sure that those measures are being clearly communicated to their staff and to also to their patrons and to any customers that may be coming in to their businesses. At this point, again, I'm just trying to stay in communication with all of you, as well as the Canmore Business Alliance members, and just making sure that whatever messaging is being passed along from town council, as well as through the other member alliance, the members of the Business Alliance, that the communication is clear, and as clear as it can be, I guess, at this point. So I think that's really all I have to add right now, and I may have a few questions as we are wrapping up. So thank you again.
Thanks very much. Ms.
Yeah,
Cottle?
thank you for being here, Cheryl. And the best for last is Ron Rempel of Boda.
Thanks, Allie. Appreciate that. Council, thanks for the opportunity to just to address you on this. And I know the others have mentioned this already, and I will reiterate, I really want to give kudos to Eleanor and the Economic Development Department on how they've handled this. It's not a normal situation, but I think that the Economic Development Department has been very proactive, looking for ways to get involved and to try to find out what the needs are and then address those needs. But I also want to thank council, because a couple of years ago, you made the decision to bring economic development in-house. And I think you're seeing the benefits out of that right now, out of that decision to bring it in-house. I was on the other side, working in economic development when it was contracted out. And it was a lot more difficult to work in that kind of a situation. So I think your decision to bring it in-house is now providing some real tangible benefits to the community. So kudos to you as a council as well. From a Boda perspective, the construction industry was already deemed an essential service. So this industry has been able to continue to work through the pandemic, and that's been very positive. So I think that business owners, business managers, the employees have respected, they've followed the more stringent protocols, they've made adjustments, and they've also got creative. One of our members wanted an opportunity for their contractors, their employees, to be able to sign in to their job site on an online basis. So another one of our members was able to create that app. and to make that much easier for the employees to do so. So that kind of creativity is coming out of this pandemic as well. We held a safety seminar a few weeks ago, bringing in Bow Valley Safety to talk about what are the specific safety protocols that need to be followed, and just walking through that process. And we had a really good turnout for that. We had really good participation in it, and just really encouraged to see that the Economic Development Department is doing that again, but from a broader perspective, bringing in the retail community, bringing in the accommodation industry as well, and food and beverage, to again talk about the safety issues on a reopening basis. And I think that's the kind of proactive thing that the Economic Development Department is doing, which is gives me that confidence that the business community can put everything in place, put the protocols in place, and will follow those, that can give you the confidence that it's going to be handled in a very positive fashion. So that's just my input.
Well, and thank you for that. Ms. Cottle.
Yeah, well, I want to thank everybody for the unsolicited kudos for Eleanor and the economic development team. I agree, but I really appreciate all of you speaking to it and acknowledging the work that she and her team have been doing, because I know she's been full on since day one of the pandemic. So thank you all for that, and thank you, Eleanor. We'll close it up and ask council if they have any. Oh, Eleanor's blushing. Look at her. She's got to raise her coffee cup to cover it. But I do want to turn it over to council, because I'm sure you have lots of questions. And I will say, you know, I do want to also address the conversations with the BIA and our thinking around Main Street, and what actions we should take for this weekend has changed. I was going to say by the day, but sometimes, Beth, it's to me felt like by the minute, and, you know, continues to change. I continue to hear from business owners. And when we had the conversation with the BIA and they're about closing parking, then we've had an internal conversation about what it would take for us to just close parking, and also how that would look on Main Street. So I need to have a follow-up conversation with the BIA, because all of that was happening just at the end of the day yesterday, and we haven't been able to touch base about that. So I'm going to turn it over to council and see if you have any questions, and then we can wrap things up.
Thank you very much. And in point of fact, the mayor will take it back from you. So I'm sure we all have questions, we councillors. I'll lead off. So Mr. Asante, just for my better understanding, the detailed plans that you've provided, is it the intent to have that in place for this weekend or some future time?
Not for this weekend necessarily. When we first started talking about it, that was one of the considerations. I think just the discussions that the BIA and town have had, it's perhaps a bit early to move to that step. A lot of the restaurants aren't operating beyond pickup. They haven't started seating. They're not prepared to necessarily modify their businesses, retail restaurants, on short notice. So I think there's a balance between trying to figure out, ultimately we want it to be safe and comfortable, because we've seen from the survey that that's what's going to bring people out and allow for the downtown to operate. Right now, there's some level of convenience in having it open, that people can go pick up their food for takeout from a restaurant, or pop into a business and not have to walk on the sidewalks from their cars. And so I think there's a timing piece that we need to really think about. When is the right time? What's the right business operation versus volumes of people that we're seeing? And be very careful about something like a partial job where we close all of the parking. We remove that convenience and force people to still continue to operate in a constricted zone, because we can't, there's no wheelchair accessibility to the parking areas. So you still have people forced to travel within the sidewalk areas on those busier blocks. So that's been the conversation that we've been having over the last couple of days, and there's likely some criteria that go into determining the right timing for that. And we expect to hear more from the province that'll inform that, and expect to hear more from the businesses about how they're planning to reopen. That can inform an appropriate time to move.
Did Mr. Canmore pop up because he wanted to add something here? You'll need to turn your mic on.
Sorry about that. No, I don't have anything specific to say yet unless there's a question. I'm just here to support the conversation.
Great, thanks. So I think given the fact that the weather forecast is not that great for this long weekend, we may have a bit of a reprieve. But we sure we're all on the same page that we don't want to wait until after there's problems, that we want to be proactive and get the changes, whatever they may be, in place before it starts getting crazy again. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what are the indicators that engineering would be looking for in order to want to implement barricades and the restricted travel. Mr. Asarte?
I think I'll actually allow Ms. Cottle to respond to this, because I think it's beyond the engineering piece. Sally?
Yeah, thanks for that, Andy. And I think that's the critical question, Mayor Bartleman, and one that we just have not had time to have with the BIA. But some of the things we've been talking about internally are having it coinciding with, like he just said, Mr. Asarte just said, with restaurants opening and having more outdoor seating, potentially with parks and campgrounds opening, which we know will be about June 1st, when we expect there to be a bit more visitation in town that's not just day trippers. Also, just traffic flows and the volume of traffic that we see coming into town. There has been, since the provincial parks have opened up, there's been some more traffic on the weekends, but a lot of it has just been a flow through. We haven't really seen the impact once retail and some coffee shops are reopening, or restaurants are potentially reopening or offering takeout when they haven't been. So there's been a sort of slow trickle for that and wanting for it to ramp up. But your point is a good one. We don't want to wait until it's at a maximum capacity and be too late. I think the other thing, and Beth, you should feel free to jump in here if you have anything to add. The other thing we heard from some of the BIA conversations is that we also don't want to do it too early. There's a concern about Main Street just looking closed and it not being welcoming, or it not being clear to people that businesses are in fact open. And if what we're doing is closing the street in support of the businesses being open, is there value in waiting a bit? There's a lot of questions around, will businesses still need to put in their patios, or do their patios change? Lots of logistical questions around, would we now allow sandwich boards as part of the way that they could be inviting people in? And we just haven't had to have time to have those questions answered. We could close the road for this weekend without any of those questions answered or anything in place. And is that also a reputation management problem if it hasn't been thought out and we haven't been able to do it in a way that is meaningful? So, the thinking and the arguments, I think, tend to ping pong back and forth when it is feeling rushed like this. And when we don't even know, right, as we're having this conversation, it's still not clear if May 14th is actually a date when businesses can open. So,
and I would note that all of our decisions have been based on careful consideration and information, and not on emotion or anxiety. So I appreciate that we would continue to move forward on an informed basis. I guess just again, from my understanding, once there is a decision to implement some of those measures that Mr. Asarte described, how long would it take to make that transition downtown, Mr. Asarte?
A basic installation could be in probably 10 days to 2 weeks time. So if we're planning around the start of June, early June, we could have line painting in place, the signal changes made, a four-way stop in at 10th, And Public Works has already started organizing barricades and getting prepared to do the work needed to do that piece. Communications is working on some signage that could be produced in about a week's time. So it's not a long turnaround, and really we're able to do it as it makes sense for the ECC and BIA.
And would the barricades that you described, the signage, the barricades be, I mean, in the past, we put up really unattractive barricades that are repelling people, and I'm certain that you have something more in something better in mind.
If you recall, with the Spring Creek Drive closure, we did use the black barricades and had some custom signage done up so that it didn't look like a closed construction zone, and used more inviting language. We're balancing that a little bit this time with some of the language to have people spacing and that sort of thing. So it's a bit still a bit regulatory, but it's geared more towards comfort and safety.
And can I just clarify that? And Andreas, maybe you can jump in here or correct me if I'm wrong, but those barricades would work if we closed Main Street. But if we closed the parking, it would actually be more the orange construction, more mobile barricades. Is that accurate?
That's correct. The ones we would use for the full closure would be the bigger, much larger, formal ones that, as Mr. Sarte mentioned, that where we could affix some signs. With some time, we could prepare some good information to share with the people coming downtown. The ones to close down the parking lane would be a very much different product. There'd be those painted 2x4s with a metal frame that wouldn't look very good, and would require a bit of maintenance because they can be easily moved or pushed over.
Councilor McCallum's has a question coming, I know that, and but Ms. Vandervoort, you look like you wanted to add something to that conversation.
Oh, I think my brain has moved on.
Okay. So
I guess just that this, again, a lot of conversation around what would make sense in the short term, and just making people feel comfortable, including our locals, in the short term. And that's why we made the recommendation in regard to just the parking at this time.
great, and since you have the mic, just really quickly, speaking as the BIA, I assume that you're supportive of the plan that Mr. Asarte's detailed?
Actually, Mr. Asarte and I started talking probably the second week in April about this, because we totally understood that as the weather got warmer, it was going to become an issue, whether we reopened or not, or whether there was a relaunch by the government. So how are we going to manage people just wandering through our streets and keeping people feeling safe? So so we started that conversation and had him come with some ideas to our board at the end of April, and that was on the Wednesday before the Thursday announcement by Premier Kenny. So we've continued on from there.
Great, thank you. So I have Councilor McCallum and then Councilor Seeley following that. Councilor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman, and thank you for everyone being here, and especially of you members from the CBA. And the work that you have been engaged in for the past 2 months is incredible, and I appreciate every minute that you've been working on these projects and these puzzles as we move forward through COVID. So I do have some questions, and I understand that the weather's not looking great, so great this weekend, but in terms of planning for the May long weekend, do we have any idea as to what our hotel occupancy might be, if we have any hotel occupancy for this weekend?
I guess you might be hoping for
Maybe I'm hoping. I don't know if anybody. I knew it was. I knew it was a question I was going to ask. So that's definitely an indicator as to how busy it's going to be. Have the CHLA shared anything with you, Rachel?
No, I'm not aware. I don't think it's much.
Okay.
I think we will probably more looking at day trippers than at people staying overnight. Another consideration probably is also that Dr. Hinshaw last weekend said it's now okay to visit second homes. So maybe the second homeowner population will be a bit higher than they used to be during COVID. We are currently at the VIC compiling a list of businesses to see whether they are open or not, and if they are open, if they allow people in their premises, or if it's takeout and delivery only. And then I'm planning on putting a piece together on how to visit Canmore safely, just again to capture the travelers that will come regardless, whether we invite them or not, and to help them make the right decision if they do come.
Okay,
That
thank
sounds
you.
great. And when you've got that complete, or as soon as possible, if you could share that with me, at least I already have interviews booked for later today that'll be looking for those sorts of details. So it'd be helpful to know what TCK is thinking about regardless.
For sure.
Thank you.
So-
Councillor,
Oh, I only get one? Okay.
I'll allow you another. Councillor McCallum.
Okay. I guess my second question was, I have actually more than two, I'll pass it off at two, was with regards to street alterations. I'm not going to say closures, because I think that there's a graduated process that may be considered during this time, but more and more as we move around town, I am noticing people taking over, like they'll be coming down the sidewalk and they'll be taking over the road, walking into the road to avoid somebody that's coming towards them on the sidewalk to safely social distance. And I guess that is my biggest concern at this exact moment. I have lots of concerns over the long term, but at this exact moment, as we encourage people to social distance and how they use our infrastructure, some of our infrastructure, they're not able to use or are not able to social distance without moving onto the street. And so if we do nothing, that is going to continue. And that is also a reputation management piece. So I guess my question is, how is administration looking at balancing those two pieces right now? There's things I think that we need to do as soon as is reasonably possible to accommodate just the locals getting around downtown, as well as on our sidewalks, et cetera, within the gateway. How are we going to accommodate that, Mr. Sarte?
Well, I think the long answer is wider paths and wider sidewalks. We have a lot of constraints throughout the community, and we're chipping away at those. We've got a lot of big projects this year that'll certainly contribute and help. I think to some extent it's at looking at the risks and managing those risks. And if you're on an open pathway and are able to move around each other with some good distance, and you're not spending a lot of time in a confined area, that's quite different than if you're on Main Street and people are stopping and going and brushing up against each other and touching same surfaces and those sorts of things. So I think there's different degrees of mitigation that are needed in different circumstances. There is no easy answer for, say, 10th Street or the East Block of Main Street, where attempts at things like unidirectional travel go so far counter to human nature that being successful with implementing them, you're challenged. So ideally, we give as much space as we practically can in as many places as we practically can. And at this point, the focus has been on the downtown, but we could certainly expand that to look at restricting parking in other areas with a lot of congestion. We do have a lot of road space, and maybe if it's more formally utilized. But at this point, there hasn't been plans for that.
Okay, and so my focus actually was just on the gateway in downtown. I wasn't looking at all our paths. I think that, you may have to step into the bush to pass somebody sometime, but that's different than trying to step through a concrete wall or into traffic. So
that's, I guess, why I brought that up. But I will let my colleagues ask more questions. I certainly have more, but thank you so much.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman, and everyone for your presentations and contributions. My question is about a Main Street plan, and I know it might be a little premature to ask this, but time to evolve for sure. Wondering about the vibrancy of Main Street, welcoming people to town, buskers. I heard a little bit about washrooms, things like that. Is there anything in the works or being considered?
No, no, there's not. There is with washrooms. I believe Mr. Como is looking at the possibility of what it would take for us to bring in additional washrooms that are slightly nicer than your standard plastic porta potty, unisex porta potty. So we are trying to figure out what might be possible there. But, you know, the point isn't vibrancy. I think if Main Street, if we close Main Street and it becomes too vibrant, we will have to remove the closure. So having buskers come in and create a festival atmosphere where people want to congregate, that does not allow for appropriate social distancing. So this isn't about turning Main Street into a festival or a market or a concert place. It would be about room to move, and that's all. And I appreciate, you know, for downtown business owners that it needs to feel inviting and welcoming, but we can't focus on vibrancy and have that be the end game. I think that is a holdover from conversations about other times when we've been talking about Main Street when it wasn't a pandemic and wanting to create a vibrant downtown. But this is about safety, not vibrancy.
Point well taken. It should be welcoming though, and I guess that's what I would hope to achieve.
And I'll just weigh in on that. And in fact, I have a different perspective, Councillor Seeley, and I'm concerned about making it too welcoming, honestly. And a couple of questions for Mr. Asarte around some of what he suggested. And I think you were suggesting, Mr. Asarte, that there would be room for to put up tents on the sidewalks for businesses, for change rooms, and I think you suggested outdoor display spaces. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that starts moving it into an outdoor festival kind of a feel, which is 180 degrees from where we should be heading with this. Mr. Asarte? He's lost his ability to speak.
Sorry about that. I should have unmuted before I shared my screen. I'm just going to try that one more time. So hopefully you can see the presentation again here and the slide. The intent with things like tents and outdoor vending isn't about making it into a market type atmosphere. It's about creating space. And so a lot of these shops are quite small and constrained and can have limited number of people based on some of the guidelines that we've understood from other places. And so if that's the case, expanding the room and separating things out allows for functional vending or functional operation of a restaurant, or allowing for queuing of lineups in that space. It will certainly allow the businesses to have a larger footprint and presence, and that'll give the street, ultimately it's going to give the street more life because it's places where people can go. But the goal ultimately isn't about creating extra business or extra expansion. It's about being able to continue to do the things that they could do previously today with new requirements. So a restaurant can continue to serve a number of people that makes that business viable with seating that extends now into a larger space to allow people to be spread out.
Great, and I think our community, our residents would agree with that direction, that we need to make it Main Street and downtown functional and accentuate the safety, the feeling of safety while we're there, without trying to create a really any sort of feeling of come on down and have a good time on Main Street, and we're going to have balloons and popcorn or anything like that. So we have to walk that fine line. I'm waiting for other hands to go up from councillors, and Councillor McCallum's got her hand up. But first, if you could speak a bit more, Mr. Sarte, to the signalization that you mentioned and the idea of trying out a scramble crosswalk that's up at the 6th Avenue Main Street intersection, is that right?
That's right. That would be at 6th Avenue and Main Street. And so it's the busy Stonewaters corner.
Some of us still think of that as the Mayor's Corner, but go on.
At that corner, we've got on that east leg, that's a key collector roadway for getting traffic into South Canmore. So we have our dedicated left turn phase to get traffic turning left off Main Street going south. And then it's always busy with pedestrians, and pedestrians will get priority, and so they make their movement, and the vehicles will queue waiting on the green phase to be able to turn right northbound onto Main Street or left southbound off of 6 onto Main Street. So the idea of a pedestrian scramble has been discussed in the past, but we felt with the need for more space and the opportunity with one leg closed to try out a scramble, that it might be a good opportunity to address need to improve the traffic flow and give more space to pedestrians by going to that scramble design sooner rather than later. And we looked into it, and it's actually a reasonable cost for about $5,000 plus the cost to do some paint. We can modify that signal to allow for that and allow for a dedicated northbound right turn onto Main Street, an added signal that would allow that to happen without pedestrians.
Okay, well, that's really intriguing. And you're saying that this could be put in place as one of the initial elements of what we're talking about doing for Main Street?
Correct.
Great, thank you. Councillor McCallum.
So I love a scramble. I've experienced them in different cities, but my one question, Mr. Sarte, is that, and I see this particularly in the scramble that's in downtown Calgary as well as in Banff, that there is an accumulation of people that accumulate in a group very close to each other at the corner while they wait. And usually they hold on to the pedestrians, flush through as much vehicle traffic as they can. And then you've got usually 30 people on every corner, and they're all scramble, which is kind of fun. But my question is that accumulation of pedestrians at the corner, is that not exactly the opposite of what we're trying to achieve?
Very good question. And yes, we do see that in Banff and other the places. The one difference we have here, so overall our signal phasing is going to be about the same time frame. We potentially could get additional queuing at the corners, but the distances to cross are fairly short, so we're able to run faster cycles than say for Banff Avenue. They have to run a pretty long green phase on the Main Street vehicle movement. And that's what really allows those big crowds to start to accumulate. So we should be able to turn much quicker phases because it only takes 15 seconds to cross diagonally on the intersection. And,
Right.
and at present, our phasing plan has the same overall time frame. Instead of queuing one corner to the next and then to the next, you can cross the intersection and get out of there.
Okay, that's a great answer. I was curious about that. If there was some speed we could look at with the light. And then the other question I have is more of a overarching question in terms of the reopening, in particular of Main Street and Canmore in general. How are we going to balance the fact that we are basically accommodating out-of-towners, not necessarily second homeowners, not necessarily locals, that have been actually told to stay home.
Who's that
they
question
not
for?
engaged. This is a question for administration, whoever's
Ms. Cottle?
or Ms. Cottle, just that whole idea of we've been told to stay in place, do not engage in unnecessary travel. The Premier has said that, yes, if it's your cottage or your second home, you may go. But at this point, I don't see in any of the phases at what point the province is looking at allowing unnecessary travel to occur. So how are we going to balance that? Because I don't think that that happens until the fourth phase, does it? Or third phase, sorry.
Yes, it actually,
Just before I throw the mic over to Ms. Cottle or Ms. DeSoto, it's worth noting that the province in reopening Alberta parks, the town of Canmore is completely surrounded by provincial parks. So it seems contradictory to open the parks and then discourage travel per se. I would say by opening the provincial parks immediately adjacent to the town of Canmore, the province is encouraging travel to
Even though they're
our
saying
region.
don't travel.
Yeah, so there's some contradictory message still.
Yeah.
But who wanted to speak to that? Ms. Cottle or Ms. DeSoto?
Rachel's raising her hand.
Ms. Ludwig, all
Well,
yours.
we've asked exactly that question
Yeah.
to our channels, right? Because we were like, okay, it makes sense to open the economy for cities and bigger municipalities where, their businesses can be supported by the residents. But opening up Alberta parks and saying non-essential travel is not recommended, that is a direct contradictory. What we were told, and that was the best that we could ever get, and we asked multiple times, is that the messaging has changed from stay home to stay safe.
Sure. I've certainly been asking for guidance on that contradictory messaging for weeks. We have, I should say, and I most recently reached out to the MLA and pointed out the contradictory information that's being provided and asked that she take that back to her caucus. And we've raised similar questions in other opportunities, but as you know, Ms. Ludwig, it's never been addressed adequately by the province. Is there somebody else wanting to jump in on this particular conversation? Anyone? Ms. DeSoto?
I would just add and support exactly what Rachel has said, and Mayor Borman yourself, that we've all been asking the same questions, as has Banff, as has Jasper. And some of the messaging we get back is that while we're discouraging it, it is permitted. So it's about personal responsibility. It's not about municipalities enforcing something that's being discouraged. So the province is continuing to say discourage unnecessary travel, but it is permitted. So I would agree, it's contradictory, but there is nothing that we are intending to do in administration to enforce that, which I think was your initial question, Councillor McCallum.
Actually, no, it was more about the philosophy of opening up and how are we going to basically accommodate that opposing messaging as a community and as a tourism host, as a destination. Ms. Cottle is speaking to the fact that now we're looking at the possibility of closing Main Street in the future, not for a festival atmosphere, not for true hospitality purposes or vibrancy, but to ensure that we're caring for public health. And that is the only reason why we're looking at that. But on the other side of that, we're basically going to be opening up Main Street to accommodate people who are disregarding the Premier's message to stay home. And I understand that there's nuances to that messaging depending on what bureaucrat you speak to in Edmonton, but I would be really confused and really concerned if I were a downtown business owner and I was trying to have to balance those those two things. Like I want to be welcoming, not too welcoming. And we want to be accommodating, but not too accommodating. It's really confusing for people, and in this uncertain time, it makes it even more confusing. That's my question.
We are a little unique in the province, I would say. The issues we deal with are very different from Cochrane or Okotoks or even the town of Banff is there in the national park. So I think the fact that Canmore is sort of out there in our own little left field, the province doesn't really consider specific situations like we have here, and does leave it to us to try to massage the message. Ms. Cottle?
I'd just add that I think it's the message we've been struggling with all along from the beginning, when people wanted us to close our borders and we said no, and also the Stop the Judgment campaign that the communication department has done. People's right to move even when it's not encouraged. So it's just the next layer of nuance in an already complicated message. And I think we will continue to work to try to figure out how to thread that needle on splitting the complexity there. It is, and I think what you're speaking to, Councillor McCallum, business owners feel acutely. They need to get open. I mean, the thing I will say that was been the most striking to me about being engaged with the BIA in this last week is the fear that business owners have, the fear of opening, the fear of not opening, and really their desire to be able to make it as a business in this community, and to want to really encourage shop locally, but knowing that locals alone aren't enough for them to really be able to make it in the long run. And so they're in a very difficult position. And I think what we're trying to do is continue to support them and to support the community in being safe, but also to support all the work we've done for several years now on being a welcoming and inclusive community. And it's a tricky line to walk.
Yeah, you're right. I wanted to move on to one or two other thoughts. Is Mr. Rempel still watching? I see his name, but not his.
Yes, I am.
There you are. And this is sort of pertinent to what we're talking about in regards to reopening a number of businesses. But I'm curious, in the construction industry, what would you say is the sense of safety or security for the workers that are on the job sites and have been throughout this whole time? And how might that translate into what businesses can do as they reopen and recognize the need to keep their staff feeling secure?
A good question. I think the construction industry has done very well to transition on that and make the changes that are necessary, working the 2 meters apart, having just one trade in a room at a time, things like that they've needed to do in order to make the transition. And I think the culture of safety within the construction industry has lent itself to that as well, because there are the regular safety meetings. A lot of the companies do have a safety officer, or they can contract a safety officer to do that and to establish the protocols that they need. So I think there was a safety culture there already within the construction industry, and so I think that assisted with it. But I think just the fact that business owners are entrepreneurs. They need to think on their feet and they need to adjust on a daily basis. That's going to enable them to do that. I think the webinar that Economic Development is putting on tomorrow is going to be really good for that too. Advising people that here are some of the things that you need to know and to be aware of so that you can now start considering reopening.
Thanks very much, Mr. Rempel. And I don't know if Councillor Hillstead has anything to add to that, given that you work within the construction industry. Any personal experience on that question?
Yeah, like for us, we've still been able to work, but again, being on a roof, it's pretty simple to keep your distancing. And then we just have things in place, like someone's feeling sick, you go and you self-isolate, you do the what the the proper procedure. So we had one of our guys, probably had just a bit of a cold. He stayed home till he was cleared to come back. So it's one of those things where you just have to adjust. Like for us, it would be, the worst case would be everyone gets sick and then we have a roof open, and then it gets a little more tricky that way, because then you just have a roof sitting there for however long. But yeah, like Mr. Rumpel said, it's just, you put things into place, you do what you can. Again, different trades will have different issues. Again, being with roofing, there's a lot more space up there. We're not going through people's houses where we just put a ladder up. We can talk from the street to whoever we're dealing with, and they don't have to let us into their house. We just throw a ladder up and get to work. So it really depends on what you're doing. If you're an electrician, talking to a few that I know, some of them are holding back right now. They're only doing small jobs every now and again. It all just depends. It's just going to be, each business is going to have to decide what they want to do and how they want to proceed. And it's just the evolution of how to do business, and you just make it work basically. So that's all I would add, is it just really depends on what you're doing, because there's certain jobs that are a lot easier to do the social distancing than other ones. So
Great, thanks for that. For Councillor Comfort, do you have a follow-up question on that?
No, I had questions earlier.
Go ahead.
So my question was, you've already spoken to it a little bit, was on messaging. So will there be one uniform position for the business of Canmore to open or close, or will it be up to their individual discretion and circumstances, depending on whether they can effectively have safe procedures for delivery of goods or whatever it is?
Who wants to take that question? Ms. McLeod.
So in general, the province has given guidelines for the various businesses on how to reopen, and it is really up to the individual business owner whether or not they're comfortable to do so. And so we've already seen from a number of restaurants, they are not opting to open even in 50% capacity, but remaining to do pickup and takeout because of customers, and every business is making that decision. In the recovery survey, with the data we have to date, it's only about 31% that says that they will open as soon as it's legally possible for them to open, and about 40% that says either the cases need to be down or only until they are confident they can provide a safe environment for their customers and staff. So I don't think we'll see reopen as per normal yet. I think it will be a bit of a staged approach as we move forward.
I don't know if anybody saw Community's response or sort of an update to their position on Facebook, but I thought it was a very good summary of the issues that the businesses are facing, and a very kind of compassionate yet practical consideration of what the issues are. So if you haven't seen that, I really recommend reading it. And the other question I had, excuse me, oh yeah. So there's a number of places I think people in the community look forward to going to, but there hasn't been really any update or like that for that possibility for reopening. One is the library. A lot of people would like to get back to the library. And so people would like to know how that's going to work and when that might be going. And the other one, of course, is Elevation Place, and then the arenas, the rec center. So the first question was for the library and the art galleries, at Elevation Place and at Arts Place. So I think people, when I think of those venues, not the theater at Arts Place, but the gallery, you could let, I don't know, X number of people in, like 8 or 9 people in at a time, give them 10 minutes, and then they have to leave. And then the other issue is, I was wondering about was public washrooms or facilities. So like at the town of Canmore, will the Civic Center be open for those washrooms to be used? And I recognize these decisions may be being made on kind of a rolling basis, but I just wondered if there could be updates on the town of Canmore page, perhaps, that, yes, we're thinking about this, but it won't happen for at least 10 days, a week, not before the 14th, like that. So that's what it is. That's what I have.
Yeah, so I'm happy to try to answer all those. I might miss a few. So if I forget, Councillor Comfort, you let me know. So part of what we're trying to do with educating the public is exactly these updates to council to put it in the public realm. And then I know that Ms. Dinaj and her team are sending updates as soon as we have them. So the library is something that can open in stage 1, but it's complicated, as you know, because the library is in Elevation Place, and Elevation Place and the arenas can open until stage 3. So neither of those facilities are opening anytime soon. We have no idea when stage 3 will be. We can't open them before stage 3, so folks will have to wait until stage 3 for those facilities to open. It's really just that simple, and we don't know when that is. The library has indicated that they're interested in opening. They're not interested in opening, as I understand it. These conversations have been with Mr. Yonker in stage 1, but they are looking at just for curbside pickup, not actually for having people back into the library. So they're working with Jim Yonker, our manager of recreation, and Stephen Hannes, our manager of facilities, on how they might do curbside pickup from doors that are just exterior doors to the library, so that we don't actually have to open Elevation Place and manage, because there's no barrier between the front door and the library door. So they're having those conversations. Museums can also open in stage 1. And so we have reached out to the Museum and Geoscience Center in the Civic Center to understand what their plans are. And at this point, we haven't heard from them that they're interested in opening as of May 14th yet. So very similar to businesses, I think all those spaces in town will open as the staff and board and membership feel comfortable. In terms of art galleries, again, that would be up to the gallery. It might seem fairly practical that people could come and be let in 10 minutes, but that's generally not how people are used to enjoying galleries. And if you think about the work that would be involved in setting up a reservation system, a lot of staff are working from home and are not working in facilities. So you'd have to bring staff in, ensure the safety of the staff, clean in between, like there could actually be a lot of cost. And not a lot of cost recovery in doing that. I will say, I think Arts Place has done a brilliant job of pivoting and providing online programming. And so I think every of all those nonprofit spaces are doing the best they can to figure out how they can open safely with the resources that they have. And as we're hearing from them, if they're in town facilities, we're working to support them the best they can. I have sent an email to Mr. Hannes, our manager of facilities, about opening the Civic Center for public washroom access. But again, that's complicated and we haven't had a chance to work through that plan. I believe I did mention earlier, and if I didn't, I should have, that Mr. Como is looking to see about the possibility of bringing some porta potties into the downtown core. As we know, we'll get more visitation, and especially as restaurants are doing takeout. We're seeing, for example, since Community reopened, a lot of people getting takeout lunch and then eating it in Friendship Park, which is in the back of the Civic Center. And there's no washroom available at Community because it's takeout only. And the only open washroom is the downtown VIC. So we're very concerned about washrooms as more and more people are in town and more restaurants are doing takeout. And Mr. Como's here, maybe he has something to add.
Mr. Como?
Yes, thank you. And we were just in contact with the supplier of the washrooms, and it looks like we may not be the only ones who are looking to open up as well. So there's been some pressure from them to be making a decision about the more attractive washrooms that we would likely want to go with in the downtown core.
Also, I think Community is, I think I have this right. They had said that they were going to have, they have 2 washrooms at the moment, which are gender neutral, but they are thinking of having one for staff and one for the public when people are doing pickup. So there may be other options as this goes on and people have to come up with solutions. It'll change. That'll be the other thing too, right? That it changes from day to day. So anyway, I appreciate all the work everyone's doing. It's a tremendous amount of work. Thank you all so much.
Just 2 questions that come along in regards to the last bit of the conversation. First, regarding the museum, Ms. Cottle, as it happens, I was talking with Mr. Sams outside of the museum yesterday and suggested he talk with you. I don't know if he has, but he indicated the museum board is anxious about reopening, and my assumption was that that couldn't happen until the Civic Center was reopened.
I don't know that that's true. I did reach out to Mr. Sams and Mr. Nickerson once the relaunch plan was made public, saying we recognized that they were listed in stage 1 and that the rest of the Civic Center wasn't going to open until stage 2. So I don't know if you mean anxious to open and that they were nervous about opening, or anxious in that they wanted to open soon. Yeah. So I did. They indicated that they were going to have a board conversation and then that they would follow up. I haven't heard back from them. So if they are wanting to reopen, we would try to work with them to figure out what will and won't be possible, but we haven't had that conversation yet. I would say it's not a definite no, but there's a lot we'd have to think through.
Right, okay. Councillor Sealy, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just had a brief conversation with the chair, and they're thinking probably early June to mid-June, so there's some time, but they are concerned about, you know, what happens. Is the Civic Center going to be open? So that's part of it as well.
Great, thank you. One other question I have from Mr. Canmore is around the washrooms on our trails, which have been locked for some time. Is it possible to get them open and serviced again?
We are working, we are hoping that we can get them open as soon as possible. The challenges we have is waiting for the PPE, or the protective equipment that is required to protect our staff. And then the other big exercise actually is how to put the PPE on and take it off, which is a challenging thing, something we've never really had to worry about. So the big thing is getting the right PPE and then providing the training so that there's no cross-contamination issues. Once those are in place, we can certainly open up the washrooms, but that's what we're holding on for right now. And perhaps we can get those products at our door by the end of this week, but we don't know. We just know that they're in transit.
Okay, that's encouraging, thank you. I just happened to be able to watch one of those washrooms from my back deck and regularly see people go over and pull on the door. And so that's great to know that you're working on that. I have run low on questions myself. Are there other? Oh, wait a sec, I do have one other question for Ms. Ludwig. So you indicated that you've been coordinating or discussing a situation with Banff Lake Louise Tourism. So what does that coordination look like?
So far, we're just keeping ourselves updated on what's going on in our communities and what we're doing. We are looking probably into some joint marketing when the time is right. And that probably is not this summer. But that's like long term. We are looking at how we can all work together, because not just tourism, but also all destination marketing organizations around the globe have funding challenges now that tourism is pretty much non-existent. And we do recognize that there might be opportunities to work together in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear to all of us that the regional visitor is the target now, and which has always been a main part of our target, but Banff is focused to a large extent on national and international travelers, and my guess is that they'll be refocusing to fight for the regional travelers with Town of Canmore.
Well, I think that's where the understanding that everyone in Alberta pretty much has is that we cannot win when everyone fights over the same traveler. We pretty much know for certain that Destination BC will try to attract Alberta visitors as well, and they have big coffers. And that's why we are working all together with Travel Alberta and the other destination marketing organizations in the region to figure something out. This is all new to us as well. We don't know how to do joint marketing, but we will figure it out. And once we do, then we'll be all better for it.
I agree. I sense a general running down of questions, discussion. Any other questions at this time from members of council? Seeing none, Ms. Cottle, did you have any sort of final summary to give us?
I feel like we've sort of talked through and summarized a lot. I mean, I think the main point is we are working collaboratively on it. It's complicated. It changes quickly. We'll all, in a couple hours, maybe less than 2, we'll hopefully get an announcement about reopening, and so everything might change again. But what I think is important to know is that we are doing our best to keep council and the community informed and to work closely and in alignment with all of our valued partners. So when there's an update, we'll do our best to provide it. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns or ideas, they're welcome.
Great, thanks. And just before I adjourn the meeting, I'll point out, I'll note for general understanding that given we're still functioning under a state of local emergency, the Emergency Coordination Center is the decision-making body on much of this work. Hence, reporting to council for information, but not looking for direction from council on this particular matter.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I will say also, just for clarity, we did have had a bit of back and forth with the BIA in particular about the Main Street closure and their motion to try to have parking closed. So I did provide them an update on what that would look like visually, which Mr. Como spoke to. And then we have not been able to close the loop. So that will be one of my tasks this afternoon. And then we will keep council posted as to what's happening with Main Street closure and any other reopening as things develop.
Great, thank you. And just one last thought, you know, if one has the nature of wanting to find silver linings in gray clouds, I think the cohesive nature of the conversations that we're seeing between the different members of the CBA, the various business groups and sectors working together is kind of a silver lining on this whole COVID situation. So thanks to all of the representatives of the various business groups for working collaboratively together with the town to address and overcome our challenges related to COVID-19. If there's nothing further to add, I'll move that this meeting be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you to all the CBA members for coming. Appreciate it.